Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This morning I'm going to talk to you, before I do my hits and losses video for the Ukraine war, about an incident that took place concerning a Venezuelan drug vessel, or as it's claimed, a drug vessel. I'm not sure, we're 100% sure. And that's kind of the point. This was a striking bit of footage that was released onto social media the other day that showed a vessel getting blown up. And I want to talk about this and discuss how actually that's a bit of a problem. Now, the issue here might be that as you watch this, you have in your mind that these are the bad guys, super bad guys. And then you might have in your mind as well, subconsciously, that all the imagery that you've seen on these action movies where the kind of good guys, the CIA, the FBI, whoever it is, blow up some vehicle of the bad guys. And you're like, yeah, bad guys get their comeuppance, because we see enough action films. Actually, it kind of distorts our sense of reality and the idea that we live in a rules-based international world order. So what has happened? On Tuesday, the US military conducted a kinetic strike against a, quote, drug vessel, which had departed from Venezuela and was being operated by a designated narco-terrorist organization, US officials say. The operation reportedly took place in the southern Caribbean. So one presumes that this took place in international waters. So this is the video, breaking video of US forces striking a drug vessel off the coast of Venezuela. So possibly in Venezuelan waters, possibly in international waters, we're not too sure. There is the boat traveling, and then it gets hit, and supposedly a number of people died on board, and that was the end of them. Here is is another bit of footage, slightly separate. It has a little bit before that shows the boat driving beforehand. So it's a marginally different bit of footage there. You can see it traveling along the waters there. Now, as John Jackson says, this is problematic. The US just executed a drug dealer without any due process, a trial, or any appeals. What is the limiting principle? What other kinds of criminals can we now execute without warning? And what's this intervention? A war? How long? What's the mission? Now, this is actually, the more you think about it, the more truly worrying this is. So again, like, try and differentiate the ideas that you might have in your head of let's eliminate the bad guys. Because we're not 100% sure these are bad guys, because there's no due process that's been completed here. Now, just imagine you are living in your house or apartment or wherever you live at the moment, and you look just across the street, across the road, or whatever, and you're looking at a house, and then suddenly a missile comes in and blows that house up. Literally in your neighborhood. That house gets blown up. Then you hear on the news that suspected criminals were living there, having some kind of drug den. Is that acceptable to happen in your country, right? Is it acceptable that a missile just flies into a building in your neighborhood and blows up the building and all 11 people inside? And the local enforcement say, yeah, they were drugs. It was a drug gang. And they were manufacturing X, Y, and Z, ready to move it on. Or they weren't even manufacturing it. They were just drugs mules, and they had some of the drugs in the house, and so we blew up the house and killed 11 people. You'd be like, yeah, okay, maybe bad guys, but do we know 100% they were bad guys? And like, if you're allowed to just blow up bad guys, what is the point? Literally, what's the point of having courts of law? Like, there's no point in having courts of law. Just go around killing people no matter what they've done. Literally blow things up. Let's become Judge Dredd. This is Mega City 1. And you are the jury and the executioner. You are the law. Full stop. Everything about it. There's no differentiation between different powers in government. So you don't have, law enforcement, the law courts, the government, the policymakers, the lawmakers. All of that's wrapped up into one. We're just going to blow up whomever we think deserves it. And then the question is, well, if you can just blow up 11 people that you claim are drug dealers, then who else can you just blow up? If you can do this off the coast of Venezuela, where else can you do this? I mean, you're doing this outside of the jurisdiction of US law enforcement. Like, this is a military strike, but on drugs. So we know the CIA is involved in Latin America, South America, in terms of trying to make sure that the drugs don't find their way eventually to the US. So, there are questions about the legality of what they're doing there and the involvement in these other countries. How much is with the complete say-so of those countries? How much, is activity that takes place on unilateral decisions that those countries don't necessarily know about all the time, but maybe they turn a blind eye. There are lots of grey areas there for sure. But just this one incident is insanely worrying. And it should make you, because it's very easy to see this on the news or on social media and just dismiss it and go, all right, yeah, the US have just blown up some drug carrying boat. Okay, right, move on to the next thing. Ooh, no, let's dwell on this. This is super dodgy. And it's worth reminding ourselves of other incidences where this, there were people that were thought to be drugs runners that were killed and they ended up not being. So everyone who's celebrating itchy trigger fingers should remember this from 2001. What is Mark Polymeropoulos talking about? Well, the Peru Cessna 185 shootdown. This was a Cessna, just a float plane, plane that can land on the water, that was shot down by the Peruvian Air Force with the say-so of the CIA, by the way. The CIA was following this plane from somewhere else into Peruvian airspace. So on the 20th of April 2001, the Peruvian Air Force shot down a civilian float plane, killing American Christian missionary Veronica Roney Bowes and her infant daughter Charity while flying into the Loreto region of Peru. Bowes, her daughter Charity, husband Jim, and 6-year-old son Carey were being followed by the US Central Intelligence Agency observation plane. The Peruvian Air Force was operating as part of their bridge denial program. The CIA did not attempt to identify the tail number of the church-owned plane per procedure. And in a video released by the CIA observers were recorded discussing whether the Cessna A185E with Peruvian registration, which had departed the town of Islandia near the Brazilian border, is a bandido, a drug plane, or an amigo, friendly. A CIA officer told Peruvian Air Force official that it may have been possible to have the plane land in Iquitos for inspection. The FAP pilot warned the Cessna for not having an authorized flight plan, but the pilot did not hear it because he was on a different frequency. As the Dragonfly prepared to open fire, a CIA officer said that the plane doesn't fit the profile, and another CIA official said, okay, I understand this is not our call, but this guy is at 4,500 feet and he's not taking any evasive action. I recommend we follow him. I do not recommend phase 3 shooting down the plane at this time, etc., etc., so on and so forth. And then confusion happened, and then there was some more discussion with the CIA. And in the confusion, CIA pilot noted that the pilot of the Bowes plane was in contact with the tower, blah, 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 blah. And then the Dragonfly opened up with a minigun and shot it down. Some people survived, some didn't. And that was a terrible incident marked by confusion and thinking that these guys were drugs runners, but they were actually Christian missionaries. And the plane was shot down. In other words, mistakes happen. That's why we have due process. So we're going to arrest you because we think that you guys are bad guys and you've done X and Y, and we're going to put you through the court system. Oh, it turns out you hadn't done X and Y. Okay, we'll let you go for free. Sorry about that. Or we put you in prison. And we follow due process. Due process isn't blowing a boat up in the middle of the water, essentially outside of your jurisdiction. So Marco Rubio just now on a drug boat Trump blew up, says Brian Krasenstein, said, this is Marco Rubio saying this, President Donald Trump blew it up and it'll happen again. Maybe it's happening right now. Wow. So as Krasenstein says, let me fix it. President Trump murdered 11 people that he claims were drug runners, leaving a foreign country in order to distract from the Epstein press conference. Well, you could read that into it as well. But, you know, so you could translate Marco Rubio saying President Donald Trump murdered 11 people and it'll happen again. Maybe it's happening right now. Because that's essentially what happened. Now, Ryan Goodman says, I worked at the DOD. I literally cannot imagine lawyers coming up with a legal basis for lethal strike a suspected Venezuelan drug boat. Hard to see how this would not be murder or war crime under international law that the DOD considers applicable. Read this expert analysis from Just Security, and you can go and do that. There's a piece by Brian Finucane there. Now, the author of the expert analysis worked at the State Department under several administrations with these types of use of force issues as his portfolio. The best line of argument for the administration might be that the law of armed conflict somehow applies. But if so, and it doesn't, that means the US War Crimes Act applies too, including the prohibition on murder. Finucane spells out the implication in the article here. So this is a quote from the article. Moreover, certain violations of the law of war constitute war crimes under both international and US domestic law. Specifically, the US War Crimes Act criminalizes murder, defined as the, quote, act of a person who intentionally kills or conspires or attempts to kill or kills, whether intentionally or unintentionally, in the course of committing any other offence under this subsection, one or more persons taking no active part in the hostilities, including those placed out of combat by sickness, wounds, detention, or any other cause. So in other words, these guys weren't involved in combat, right? So many other states not only criminalise this offence, but have universal jurisdiction over the crime, regardless of who perpetrates it. We still lack details about the individuals aboard the targeted vessel, as well as a legal rationale for the attack. But if the US forces are targeting individuals who are civilians, not qualifying as combatants, fighters, or directly participating in hostilities, this raises the spectre of accountability under the War Crimes Act. In other words, the US has just advertised that they have committed a war crime. And Marco Rubio has said, and we're going to do it again. And maybe we're doing it now. So if the law of armed conflict does not apply, and it does not, then the DOD has a long-standing view that assassination and murder are part of the customary international human rights law that applies to military action beyond US borders. This is a 2024 operational law handbook. And you can go and read it here. I mean, there's an excerpt from it just below. And, you know, just so that it's not just someone on the internet like myself having a random view, or this person indeed. It's like the US's own law book and handbook and rules book saying that this is a human rights violation. So, you know, in contrast to fundamental human rights, these non-fundamental human rights do not necessarily bind states during all operations inside and outside a state's territory as non-fundamental human rights. And then you've got fundamental human rights, which do, and that includes, so customary IHRL determined to be jus cogens consists of peremptory norms, so fundamental and universally accepted that they do not permit any derogation, even by treaty. The prohibition against genocide, slavery, murder, causing disappearance of individuals, torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment, prolonged, blah, 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 blah. So these are fundamental human rights that are protected, right? Not non-fundamental human rights. Okay. So, which may change outside the borders. Okay, these statements by Secretary Rubio make the legal case against the US strike even stronger. So, John Hudson here, as mentioned, reporting that President Trump decided against interdicting the alleged drug boat. And so, actually, this is another point. President Trump decided against interdicting the alleged drug boat and chose to destroy the boat to send a message to drug cartels, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters in Mexico. Quote, instead of interdicting it on the president's orders, we blew it up. In other words, the president has directly ordered a human rights violation and a war crime. So in other words, Donald Trump is technically a criminal in ordering this. When asked if the US sent a warning to the boat before it was destroyed, killing everyone on board, Rubio insisted that the vessel, like others carrying drugs, posed an immediate threat to the United States, providing the right to destroy it. Rubio tried to justify the military action by noting that interdicting drug smugglers doesn't work. He said the business model of drug cartels factors in a 2% loss. Oh, that's all right then. Drug seizures won't stop the cartels, Rubio said. What will stop them is if you blow them up. Wow. So really what we have here, and Ryan Goodman, who's discussing this, is a professor of law at the New York University and former chair professor of Harvard Law and former special counsel at the Department of Defense. So this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's agreeing with the just security piece that this is indeed completely illegal. And I would tend to agree. So in the Just Security article, there is a lot to discuss. I'm not going to, this is only a relatively quick video. War powers resolution, the UN Charter, of course, any use of force by the United States must also comply with the UN Charter, and it's not clear that this did. Use of lethal force, assassination ban, law of war, the right to human rights, right to life and human rights law. So we're going to get just to the conclusion here. And Finnecune here says the Trump administration's military attack on this alleged smuggling vessel, and that's really important that the word alleged is there, because although we're being told it is, and although it probably was, right, I'm not denying it was, there is a chance that it wasn't, and that mistakes are made, as we saw from the case with the Peru Cessna shootdown. That's why you have due process, and this is not due process. So this is essentially murder of 11 people, really. So anyway, the Trump administration's military attack on this alleged smuggling vessel is not only extraordinary and unsettling in its own right, but also because of the context in which it occurs and for what it may portend for future action. The use of lethal force in this attack appears gratuitous, and the administration has not explained why law enforcement tools were inadequate to address the situation. You've got that blithe assertion from Marco Rubio that interdictions don't work, right? Where's the evidence? Is that definitely the case? Of a piece with the deployment of troops to US cities, the strike is an unnecessary and performative use of the US military, a use that is legally fraught at best. Indeed, Trump threatened Chicago with a troop deployment in the same Oval Office appearance in which he announced the strike. And the use of lethal force against these supposed terrorists is ominous, both because the Trump administration has vowed further such strikes in Latin America and because the administration has deployed the terrorist label more broadly domestically, including against migrants and political opponents. Congress, which has largely been missing in action this year, needs to reassert its own prerogatives over war powers and the use of these military tools as the White House seeks to further abuse these instruments both abroad and at home. The only case you can really make is that it's okay to break the law because you're trying to achieve a greater good. This is the consequentialism I often talk about. But actually, that consequentialism may be a moral value system that you utilize, that you can kind of abide by, generally speaking, and I'm not certain that you all do. But there is a differentiation, and I've said this time and time again, there's a differentiation between morality and legality. So we can say that something was morally good when we look at like the whole scheme of things as a kind of zoomed out overview. We might personally evaluate that, or in the end, that was a good thing that happened because X, Y, and Z. But that doesn't mean it's lawful or legal. So you might say, it was good that that horrible person was murdered. And you might build up a moral case that some person was murdered by a vigilante. But what the vigilante did was not lawful and has to follow due process. Otherwise, we all go around. Otherwise, it tells us all that law doesn't matter, and we can all go around and exact whatever vigilante personal kind of legal code that we have, and we can enforce that. We can just go around shooting people because, hey, I feel that guy was a wrong 'un. so it's okay to go and kill them because there's no legal comeuppance to that. No, so we have to follow the rule of law, otherwise it's chaos. And that rule of law sometimes means that we hold people accountable for doing bad things to bad people, because you can't just rely on subjective appraisals of the goodness or badness of people and then take the law into your own hands. We have the whole legal system to try and make sure that our subjective appraisals aren't what sentences are dependent on. You have to go through a whole system where that's the minutiae of these evaluations is laid out in the legal code and in the legal system. And so you say, right, this guy's doing bad, and then law goes, oh, are they doing bad? And then they go and look at them and they build up the evidence, and there's enough evidence to say, okay, we're going to take them in. We're going to put them through the legal system. They go through the legal system. You work out whether they really are bad or not. And then sometimes you have a jury, and then, if they're found guilty, then they're sentenced in accordance with the laws of the land. Sending a missile into a boat blowing up 11 people is not doing any of that. So the US, I think, has broken the law here. And this sends a really dangerous signal, I think, to all of us that the US believes it's beyond the law, whether domestically or internationally. What does this say about the future? What does this tell us about what the Trump administration, for example, is willing to do? So don't look at this and go, yeah, the bad guys got it. Yeah, those drugs aren't going to find their way onto American streets. That you may feel that personally. I may actually look at that and go, if these guys were truly bad guys, then, that it might be that I can build up a moral case of consequentialism whereby a greater good has been achieved by this, possibly. But I can't know that as well. Like, that's real speculation. And you're trying to look into the future about the amount of drugs that find its way to the streets and how many drugs were there on board there. It's a lot of people on that boat. 11 people on that boat, when you probably wouldn't need that many for, I don't know, whatever. Like, I could try and build up a case, but it's simply wrong that the US does that to that boat. It is legally wrong, sorry. It is without doubt legally wrong. And I can build up a far stronger consequentialist case that if the US feels it's okay to break the law here, then that can lead to a slippery slope and degradation of the rule of law. And this leads to a much worse consequence. So you can build up a consequentialist case for that being good, the drugs not finding their way to the shores of America. But I can build up a consequentialist case that also degrades the US's willingness to be held accountable, to follow the rule of law. And then you get to a far worse place in 5-10 years' time. Anyway, that's my tuppence. Let me know what you think. Take care. Toodle pips.